I want to thank Al Hunt and Hugh Toner very much for being on this panel. Now, I had the idea to invite both of these people who are distinguished in their own right and in their own age group to be with us here, Al and I, but to give us their perspective on going to Normandy for the first time. And it occurred to me that both of them had been this year. Here we are now, 81 years after the great moment that is described in this film. So that was really 60 years ago. And so much has changed there on the coast. But I thought it would be interesting to have a discussion about what it's like to go for the first time and to see many of these sites that were illustrated, but also to tell us a little bit about how it felt to be there at this time. So before I begin to ask both of you about your reaction to the film and also your visit, I'd just like to say that I have some memories of this particular television program because I was invited to a birthday party on June 6th, 1964. And my parents told me that before the cake arrived for the birthday girl to blow out the candles, I was supposed to go down and watch this film. Now, that seemed a little bit odd to me, and I was a bit resentful about it, but in 4th grade, I asked Granddad about this particular subject, and he didn't really talk about the war, but he gave me the 4th grade version of the invasion of Normandy, because over at the admissions office, as it is today, he had a very large map of D-Day +2. You know, that famous picture of the barrage balloons and the ships coming and unloading their things on shore. But he did give me that, that little commentary. And he would answer any question you'd ask him, but he certainly was thinking about the future, not so much the past. I will say today that we have almost every president every 10 years, or sometimes every 5 or 10 years, will go to the Normandy coast to remember the people who perished and are buried there. It's interesting, on the 10th anniversary of D-Day, however, Dwight Eisenhower was President of the United States. And of all the presidents that had ever gone to Normandy, he had a better reason to go than most. But he was so worried that this iconic event would be politicized that instead of going to Normandy, he sent a gift, by the way, to St. Mary Glees. It was a torch, and he asked General Giroux to take it to that wonderful village. And I'm sure Madame Renaud was in receipt of this, with others, of this torch. But instead of doing commemorative things and going out and taking credit for all of this, he asked the family to leave him be, and he went up to Camp David for a whole day in solitude. Well, again, I've got one more little story to tell you that's really pretty funny, if I may say so. I don't know if you noticed in the section about the hedgerow that suddenly Walter Cronkite was driving did you notice? Yes. Well, there is a reason for this. I had the wonderful opportunity to be Walter Cronkite's dinner partner. He was about 85 years old at the time. And he said, "Your grandfather was the worst driver I've ever been." So I can tell you that the hedgerow part of that was done the next day because Cronkite protested bitterly and said, "I'm driving from now on." Now, this should not come as a surprise to anybody who was living in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania while my grandparents were here, but I think my grandfather racked up more speeding violations on Confederate Avenue than anybody else in town. And nobody wanted to ride with him, including me. So let me turn over. It's been 60 years since this documentary was made. And you can see certain things that do look different because of the development of the area itself. But Al, let's start with you. You just got back, actually, not that long ago. You were there this summer. And say a little bit more about your first impression and what prompted you at this stage of your illustrious career, to go now and to be there at this particular time?
Why did an old man like me decide?
No.
You know, I'll tell you something. That's a very good question, because all of us have bucket lists, right? I mean, it's just what you do as you get older, you have more bucket lists. And at the very top of my bucket list for years has been Normandy. And I just didn't have the opportunity, or I didn't make the opportunity. And my wife, Judy Woodruff, is a television reporter. She had been once with the president, but that's different. And so I really wanted to go, and we were going to be in Europe, and so courtesy of the great Susan Eisenhower and her brother, they lined us up with the world's greatest guide. And I only have two regrets. Number one, why did he take me so damn long to go there? And any of you, how many people here have been to Normandy? Raise your hand. And how many people here have not been to Normandy? Of those in the latter group, don't wait till you're 80 to go to Normandy. Go soon. It was an emotional experience. And the only parallel, frankly, was being at Gettysburg, where you think you're walking on hallowed ground. You really do. And on Omaha Beach, you feel the same way. When we were on Omaha Beach, there were a couple people, the weather wasn't that great, but a couple people trying to get sun, and there was somebody, a beachcomber out there, and there were kids building sandcastles, and you looked out at that channel, and you thought 34,000 Americans came across with German gunfire, and it really was an emotional experience. I mean, the cemetery was, obviously, but being on Omaha Beach really, really did, profoundly affect me, and I had lots of thoughts. I love that film, by the way. Yeah. I think it captured General Eisenhower. What I found so attractive about that was he devised this, it really was a brilliant plan, and he would have been the first to say, things always go wrong with brilliant plans, and he gave so much credit to those commanders there, the lower ranking officers, and I love the fact that he gave credit to that young sergeant who devised the things to get through the hedgerows and the tanks. But it was just, I loved we only were there for 2 days, so those of you who haven't gone, go more than 2 days. And I tried to go to everything that Susan and David recommended, and I got about halfway through that. Yeah. There's so much. And I love that emotional experience, but I also love seeing the other parts of Normandy that you don't read about. Yeah. St. Marie-Église is obviously one, but there are other little villages where there's incredible stories. So I think it's, I just said one final thing. Your friend Dorothea told me that there really has been a great renewed interest in Normandy over the past quarter century because of Tom Brokaw's book on the Greatest Generation, Saving Private Ryan, and the HBO film, The Band of Brothers. And that's good. And I thank you, Susan. I loved it.
Well, I'm so delighted to hear that the trip was that meaningful. I must say that I went there for the first time in the 1970s. Remember, this is done in 1964. There were no parking lots. There were no museums next to the places where you would go to. You'd visit many of the places here. It was not at all something for tourists, really. And there wasn't even a highway between these cities, so it could take hours to get from one end to the other. I was told that if I stepped off the cow path that I could be blown up because they were still demining things and getting unexploded ordnance out of the fields. And so I was very, very privileged this year, I should say, well, I guess the end of last semester, to take my students to Normandy. This is the 5th time I've done it, and Hugh was on that trip. And Hugh, I assigned a beach or an operation to each of my students to research and to make a presentation, and Hugh pulled the straw that said Omaha Beach. So what was your reaction when you visited there and that was your first time?
Well, I think at least throughout the whole entire Normandy experience, there's so much to take in there while you're there that you don't really know what you take out of it until a little while after you've left. Like, it's something that kind of sits with you and you reflect on after you've been there. When I was there at Omaha Beach, you know, first off, I mean, just the cemetery itself, it's very beautiful, but at the same time, you can't, you're not allowed to walk on the grass in the American cemetery out in Omaha Beach, which I found was very kind of disappointing and a little sterilizing. But, you know, throughout the whole experience, you know, you really kind of get that, when you get down on those beaches, you can really feel it. And I think that that was one of the things that really kind of stuck with me. Although it kind of takes a little longer until you really know how you feel about what you feel, if that makes sense.
It does. One thing that interests me a great deal is the future of this area. It's not just whether it's going to get public attention and tourists are going to come, but I was called by a professor at the University of Caen who asked me if I would be on a panel or something to discuss with the university authorities which villages they should save because of climate change. And there is a significant amount of beach erosion now. In the shots you saw of Pont de Hoc, since you've both been there recently, you can see the dramatic difference in the lineup of the cliffs. I actually declined to be on that panel because I think the decision about which villages to save and which beaches to shore up is really a decision of the French. We came and we did what we were supposed to do wholeheartedly, and I think one thing that concerns me, of course, is the sense of ownership about that area. It is a part of the world that has a thriving economy in the agricultural sector. Did you get any impression that the beach and the area is vulnerable from an ecological point of view?
Well, as you say, Point de Hoc and other places, you can see the erosion, and every beach place is threatened by climate change. So yes, I did, Susan. But I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
I want you to tell the wonderful story that you just told me at dinner about the time that your grandfather came in and he injured his knee and he had to go and recuperate. And tell us what happened.
Well, you remember the story in this film where he says that he had a crash landing. They had moved headquarters from what was called Shellburst. Shellburst is near Bayeux, which is right in the middle of these beaches. And Shellburst is just a field today, though there is some rumor that there might be underground a facility that was used for headquarter purposes. But that is to be excavated, I guess. Anyway, they moved their headquarters, and he had to get there on an urgent basis. And this is when the crash landing occurs on this beach, this possibly still mined beach. And he had injured one of his knees playing college football for West Point. But this time he injured his other knee, and he said that they were picked up by these 10 individuals, and he was taken to the chateau where he was supposed to be staying at least for a matter of a week or so. And he really couldn't walk, so he had to have his feet up, and he was having some medical attention at that time. But the word got out in the local community that the Supreme Commander was at this villa, and don't laugh, it's Villa Montgomery. Montgomery, by the way, is a Norman name, so that there's some irony too. Well, anyway. And they very kindly brought over 2 cows so that the Supreme Commander could have fresh milk. And it wasn't long before Ike realized that nobody on his staff knew how to milk a cow. It's true, so they had to give him some crutches or whatever and help him out to this little barn. I've actually been to this house before, twice actually. There's a little barn there, and he had to have his staff come out and learn how to watch him milk cows, and to teach the others. Anyway, as reports tell us, that the cows he named personally were Mirabelle and Lulubelle, just like a good Kansas farm boy I think there's something funny that no one else knew how to do that.
Well, the story, the other thing is, and I think you alluded, there's so many wonderful stories. I
Right.
mean, they're tragic stories, but there are wonderful stories to much of which you saw in that film. The only thing the only downer about watching that film is I can't imagine today who would be Eisenhower and who would be Cronkite, because they were such a wonderful. It was the report. Although I must say that when Cronkite asked him a very good question, basically about how difficult did he find Montgomery, Eisenhower, the diplomat, said, "Well, I never. It was you reporters that had the problem." Oh, sure. But one of which Susan was my great guide for a lot of this, and with that and Stefan, and one there were several that just like you, I thought about even more in the days and weeks since then. One, there's this little village, and I can't pronounce the name. You pronounced it at dinner tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, Plain.
Yeah, Anglo Plain.
And the 101st had landed, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, well before the amphibious landing came in. And they captured this little village, and it was a pretty bloody battle. It wasn't big, but it was very bloody. And they set up a hospital in the church. And these two young men, Mr. Moore and Mr. Wright, 19 and 20, were the medics, and they set up the Red Cross there, and they took care of the German wounded as well as the American wounded. And sometime later that day, which I gather happened frequently, the Germans retook this little village, and they were killing people, because that's what you did in places like that. And the German captain barged into the church and with a pistol, and was shocked to see these medics taking care of the Germans as well as the Americans, and declared that church off limits to his soldiers. And it's just incredible. I mean, there's still blood stains on the pews there. And the two young medics came back frequently, and one of them is buried in the cemetery there. I mean, there are probably hundreds of stories like that. And it's just the experience, you said, on looking at Omaha Beach and that incredible landing and what happened that day. And I must say, Susan, the one thing that really surprised me was the small number of casualties.
Yeah.
I mean, 156,000 Americans, Brits, and Canadians coming across, and I think there were 4,400 killed. And I mean, that's really rather remarkable, and it attests to what a good overall plan it was.
Well, I think that's very true. Hugh, we've already started the class for this coming semester, so there were a number of things I was saying to them last week, including I think we're going to have to lock up your cell phones here, because we want to get back into the scene and have a sense of what it was like. And you all cooperated very nicely about not using cell phones while you were on that beach. But I do think that there was one thing I really wanted to convey to the group this year that maybe I'm not sure I made a big enough deal about it, but this extraordinary story of pulling component pieces of a harbor, and two of them, and constructing them there on these beaches so that the supplies could be brought in and the rest of it. And I pointed out, folks, they weren't using computers, nor were they using AI. Okay, they were using, and this is a remarkable part of the story. Is that something that you absorbed then and still do?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, well, when we were there, we were on Air Maj, and you can see the mulberries are still out there. I mean, with, year over year, they were talking about how they keep on, eroding slowly and disappearing. But, you can still see them when you're there. And even at other places, I believe at Omaha Beach, they had one out of the water as like a model. And you get up to one of these things and they are huge. So to just think about like how quickly that they were able to do all of this, but then also all of the people that kind of were, all of the moving pieces that put that all together and how they're still standing there today, that was really impressive to me.
That's right. Just before we arrived last year, Gare du Nord in Paris, the train station that actually services the Normandy coast, was shut down, and half of, I don't mean to exaggerate, but certainly a big portion of Paris was shut down because they found unexploded ordnance there. And when we got out to Omaha Beach, of course, some little boy had been blown up a couple of weeks before we were there because he saw something pink in the sand and pulled it, and it was a mine. So this is one of the impacts of climate change, because the storms on the English Channel are getting much worse, and they're more, and it's just churning this stuff out. You can still walk along those beaches and find pieces of artillery shells and things. It's very current. Would you like to say something else about that?
Yeah, I mean, just like when you get down there at the beach, you know, is one of the strongest things that I did feel like during the trip. Because again, when I was there, there was so much to take in to where I didn't really know what to think or feel. But when we went to the German cemetery, you know, there was it's a very different scene than any of the other cemeteries. There are just squares within the ground. And it's a very solemn scene. But we did go over to one of the graves of Michael Wittmann, who was a Panzer ace. And when you get there, you know, you see that the grass all around it is dead, and that he gets a lot of visitors. Which to me, like, that was one thing that, like, of all the things on the trip that really kind of stuck out to me the most was, you know, 81 years later, you have, you know, a German officer who people are going and making a pilgrimage for.
An SS German officer.
An SS German officer. And there was one of those German Christmas wreaths next to it. It was in March, so it might have been there for a bit. But I remember getting very, very upset when I was like kind of looking at that, because it was towards the end of our trip, and you know, you get to, after going to Omaha Beach already and all of that, you kind of get there and you think about, like, well, what was that for? You know, obviously the war was a huge, bigger thing, but if you're looking at, like, end goals sort of thing, I'm a political theory person, so I always try to think about things in that kind of way. So, like, when I looked at it, a big takeaway for me was this is, like, you can't necessarily fight a war against an ideology without, like, a constant reaffirming of your values after that.
Very well
and
put.
Yeah, you know, that was kind of like the most shocking thing to me being there, was just being in that German cemetery and seeing all of the dead grass around that one spot. And then you go to the American cemetery and you've got a lot of heroes there, but there's no dead grass there because you can't walk on the grass.
Because you can't walk.
Well,
on
Susan told me beforehand, and she was absolutely right, the British cemetery is better run and in many ways more interesting than the American cemetery. It's more open, more accessible, and they have, on a number of the graves, they have things about the British soldiers. You know, he was he had one kid, or he was training to be an electrician. They have none of that they have on the American cemeteries where the young person was from, which is good. But I was prepared because you told me that. But the British cemetery really is smaller, but it is more interesting.
Well, what's interesting is the British cemetery tells you how old the person was.
Right.
And they give you the date of birth. You know, believe it or not, the American cemetery only gives you the date of death and not the date of birth as well.
Susan, I had dinner, and then I called her later with a former British ambassador to Washington, Karen Pierce, and I mentioned that to her. The British cemetery was more interesting. She said, "Oh, we're very good with the past."
Well, speaking of the past, just recently, I spoke at the Ford Presidential Library and Museum. The topic was the Greatest Generation. And I think that this reference that Eisenhower makes to the Greatest Generation at the end, they gave us another chance, some time to, make things better for the world and to find this peace. I just can't let this evening go by without recognizing Susan and Roger Sullivan, who are here in this audience. Please raise your hand if you're out there I believe you are. Over there, yes. Susan's father was Andrew J. Goodpaster, one of my mentors, but also an indispensable aide to not just George Marshall during the Marshall Plan years, but was Dwight Eisenhower's day-to-day national security aide in the White House for 6 of the 8 years. He was a remarkable man, and for me, Susan, he represents all of the attributes of the greatest generation, having, served his country for such an extraordinary time. He was Supreme Commander of NATO forces. He was the superintendent of West Point that went back and cleaned up the academy after the cheating scandals. So let me ask both of you about this notion of the greatest generation. I did say one thing at the Ford Library that might have been a little controversial, but we've got it narrowly defined as just a tight little generation, a 20-year kind of accomplishment. But George Marshall and Douglas MacArthur were both born in 1880. Eisenhower in...
One out of two is not bad.
Yeah, right. Eisenhower in 1890, Bradley in 93, Patton in 95. I'm just saying that this was not a war without leadership. And
Well, Tom Brokaw's a good friend. I love the book. I think he makes a very compelling case, but it could have been written about other generations too. I mean, it wasn't the only great generation. It was great. And I think there have even been people since then. So I'm never going to criticize Tom Brokaw's book.
But what would you say were the values, if you were to think back on the impact of this war, and especially those who came on shore on D-Day, just because of the extraordinary scale of it, complexity, and all those things. What do you think they took away from this?
Well, certainly it was an extraordinary testament to courage, but it also ushered in the American dominance of the world, and I think soldiers afterwards, it's like you. My guess is that on June 6th, there wasn't a single soldier who said, boy, if we do this, America is going to be the dominant power in the world. But afterwards, looking back, that's what ushered it in. Yeah. I mean, would the war have been won if D-Day had failed? Almost everybody says yes. It would have taken, a couple years, more. It would have been far more casualties. So I think there's that. Susan, I have to say one thing. I read a great deal about the war and about D-Day, although I just went there for the first time. I'm sorry, the genius of your grandfather, the political genius of your grandfather, and I say that in very compliment. Think of the people he had to deal with as the Supreme Allied Commander. The Churchill story earlier. I mean, Churchill was going to go on D-Day against Eisenhower's wishes. And if I wonder who told King George about it. Yeah. Does anybody have any guesses? But he had to deal with Montgomery, who may have been a brilliant general, but wasn't an easy human being. He had to deal back. He had the great General George Marshall, Franklin Roosevelt, and a little bit with Stalin. He was dealing with these incredible people, not to mention some of his own generals. And he put it all together. I don't think there's any other contemporary, greatest generation or not, who could have done that.
Well, if I may just tell you a funny story or two. I mean, one of the things that's extraordinary about this town, and I know I've made this point before, but what happened over at the Eisenhower farm, at least when I was a kid at Kefauver Elementary School and trying to kind of have a normal life, he would bring his wartime associates here. He did not use that house for country weekends for friends or things like that. They'd have them over for dinner, but it was either all family or, as I say, friends for a meal, but they didn't make house parties out of it. Churchill came here, de Gaulle came here, Adenauer came here. Konrad Adenauer, that's the first chancellor of New Germany, and many others, who were involved in that war. Macmillan came. He had been in World War II as well. So you have a really interesting array. You would have wanted probably the Eisenhower tour, the Gettysburg battlefield, of course, not just Charles de Gaulle went on that tour, but so did Monty. Field Marshal Montgomery was here several times.
Because that's the war that Eisenhower studied at West Point,
Yeah.
along with the other stars of that. of that class.
Exactly. So anyway, Monty was a little bit difficult, but for those of you who don't know that much about Mamie Eisenhower, she was amazing. And she knew, let's see, in Britain they call it how to chat somebody up. You know, that's a very special thing. It's not flirting, but it's being sort of vivacious and punching a few back. Okay, so Montgomery, I think the first trip to the Eisenhower farm was after he came to the White House first, and he looked around and sniffed, well, it's not Buckingham Palace. And Mamie goes, thank goodness for that, darling. Anyway, she told me that he was her favorite house guest, if you can believe that. And she called him adorable. I don't know. She obviously saw something in him that wasn't, quite so obvious to others. So Hugh, do you have some thoughts about what this war might have meant in making this generation or generation and a half or whatever so special and so productive later in life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously, I think that, what they have gone through, there's no greater kind of development for character. That is the greatest character development that I think that you could go through. But I think not only just that, and within their lifetimes, but passing that down. I do think that to a certain extent, those types of, courage and all these other things that shaped our society because of that get passed down onto us as well. These men who went and stormed these beaches, then went on to raise kids, and I do believe that they instilled some of those values, and I can see it with my dad and my grandfather. I can see some of these after effects that live on.
Well, one thing I think is so intriguing about it is that there are going to be all sorts of stories that are lost just because they will be because of the size and scale. And they're going to be lost also because some people went through so much trauma that they couldn't talk about it. And I knew many people, many veterans who didn't go to these ceremonies, and the rest of it just simply couldn't take thinking about it again. So there is one person who came on shore on D-Day on the first day, and in the first wave. And it took me about 5 years to finally get out of him, because I would never press anybody for information. But I just said, if it wouldn't be disrespectful for me to ask you what unit, and he said I was a signal guy. That's it. He didn't want to talk about anything more. It took me about another 5 years to finally ask him, okay, don't tell me anything about your experience, but is there anything that you learned and you retained? And his answer was, keep moving. And actually that's profound, isn't it? Yeah. We're in a time of trouble now, and the tendency is to hunker down, to kind of hide, to curl up in a little ball, but we got to keep moving, and we got to do so with a sense of hope and spirit, the kind of spirit they brought us.
Yeah.
So, Al, in looking back, because we're going to open this up for questions, and looking back, do you have any way to summarize your experience? If you were to talk to somebody who you've never met before, and of course encouraging them to go to learn more about the history and the rest of it, is there any one single thing that stayed with you?
Yeah, it's that sense of looking at it and just trying, just for a moment, I mean, as surreal as it is, just to imagine you were one of those young men from Iowa, from West Virginia or Wyoming, and the daunting challenge that it was, and what they achieved, and what it meant, as your grandfather said at the very end of that wonderful film, it gave us a chance, another chance for freedom. There were other places in World War II, and my dad was in the Pacific, so there were places in the Pacific that were also quite seminal. But I don't think there was any place that was more seminal than Normandy. I mean, it's a little bit psychological, but it really is just an extraordinary experience to be there and to think about what it meant.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And Hugh, when you say it only occurs to you later, you're beginning to absorb it. What are you going to take with you into the future, do you think? Is this going to have an impact on your thinking as you go forward?
Yeah, well, it's one of the things that you always said within our group is when you're standing on Omaha Beach, when you're standing on these beaches, especially, me when I was there, I couldn't help but think about, the 18, 19, 20-year-old kids my age who would, 80 years ago gone and done that. So like one of the big things that has stuck with me, at least throughout that program that we've had, was when you would say, keep moving, and you would tell that story. And, one of the things that I think how this kind of takes away, if I'm telling someone who's going to think there, it's, well, one, don't be prepared to leave there with thinking that you know everything, because it's going to take a while for it to really all come together. But two, at the same time, you do want to also kind of take in both sides of it, because there's a lot of horror and bad things that happen there. But if you go there today, it's a beach town. You go to Omaha Beach and it's a beach town, and people will swim there during the summertime. And I think that was something that I felt uneasy with at first, but our tour guide had said, like, no, this is exactly how it is supposed to be. This is what we came here to do, is so then people could enjoy these beaches. So yeah, just kind of taking in, the whole situation, look at the good, look at the bad.
Yeah, well, I think all of that is, those are wonderful ways to think about it. I myself keep thinking about what it was like for 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. This is why I like to take undergraduate students. They are the same age as the guys who came on the beach. And I'm particularly intrigued by the way the documentary footage of them being on the ships, waiting to ship out. What might they have been thinking of? They knew exactly that they were about to go into warfare. Most of them were drafted. And so you think about not really knowing emotionally what they were getting themselves in for, and they didn't even know who they were as a person. And they found out in about 30 seconds as soon as they hit the beach. They found out whether they were courageous, cowardly, scared to death, dysfunctional. And this is one reason that many people in this room will know perfectly well that their fathers didn't want to talk about these things. Right. And it's something that they lived with for the rest of their lives.
I have a theory, Susan, tell me if I'm wrong. I think the paratroopers had a little bit different mindset. Mm-hmm. And remember the great story that Eisenhower told, where the paratroopers, when he went to visit them, said, "Don't worry, General, we got it for you."
Yeah.
I think that's the mindset there. And it doesn't mean they're any more courageous or any less scared, because inside they probably are. But I found that a very telling story, and a very, I think, emotional story.
Well, I think I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that they volunteered to become paratroopers. That this was a special category. So they would be today more in some kind of special forces category, because jumping out of airplanes was new to this war, and what's that? And they made more money. Thank you.
I knew one of them quite well. I told Susan earlier, Sam Gibbons, who was a congressman from Florida. Mm-hmm. And I covered the Congress for the Wall Street Journal, and I knew Sam quite well. I even spent some time with him down in Florida. I don't think he ever talked about what he did. I mean, I asked him a couple questions, and we dropped it. And I think that really was not unusual.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So it's a little hard to see up here, but we'd love to take some questions if you have any. Oh, there we go, and then there was light.
Let there be
Right.
light.
Yep, just raise your hand. We'll bring the mic around.
Thank you. As a son of a World War II veteran and served under your father in Patton, I'd love to know what your grandfather thought of General Patton.
Actually, I would refer you to Dwight Eisenhower himself. He is so articulate on the subject of, actually in my book, How Ike Led, I had a little section where he analyzed the way the generals around him lost their tempers. But he was a very emotional person himself, so he had, what should we say, he had some personal management issues with how he lost his own temper, but he became a great diarist as a way to blow off steam and other things. He described George Patton as being a man who emotionally operated on a very, very long spectrum, either on one end or the other. And so, you know, but he needed Patton. He needed Patton for his speed, his capacity to move quickly. But Patton's leadership style was significantly different than Eisenhower's. He was an authoritarian, and he wanted things done a certain way, and he would sometimes be quite cruel. And that's not just a slapping incident, but I've had veterans tell me that, you know, he barked and carried on enough to, you know, that is a mobilizer over a shorter term, but I don't think it's sustainable in real leadership. You have to be working hard to inspire people so that they feel like they're doing this for a larger cause.
Susan,
Yes.
I teach with her brother, and I one time asked David, who did your grandfather consider the greatest general in World War II? I didn't know if he would say Patton or Bradley, and he said, oh, easily Zhukov. He said he thought
Wow.
the Russian general was an absolute genius.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that was.
and they maintained a friendship after
Yeah,
the war.
well, the Eastern Front was really, I mean, we ought to study more of that. I think we'd learn a lot that might be useful in contemporary society. Okay.
I just want to say that my dad and a lot of his buddies would always say about Patton was, I'm sure you heard this, because I grew up hearing it, and I was a paratrooper, so that you won some years in the Army, but I would hear them, they would say, our blood, his guts. Did you ever hear that?
Oh, wow, I've never heard that. Did all of you hear that? Our blood, his guts.
That's how they would rephrase it.
That's how his father, who was in Patton's.
Well, remember when Obama ran for the presidency, he reminded everyone that his grandfather had served in Patton's army.
Yeah.
It was Patton's army that he talked
Right,
about.
right, right.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. Thanks for this presentation. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I'd like to say two things. One, you asked about experiences in Normandy and having been there. Two things that stood out for me were three things. One is standing on the beach and imagining, you know, being a young man getting off a landing craft and looking up and imagining anybody got off the beach.
All right.
The second is when you go to the cemeteries, and something that resonates with me today is there's a sign when you pull up at the cemetery in the parking lot. It says, "This land is the United States." I forget exactly what it says, but it basically is, this was ceded, the land was ceded by the country of France to the United States. This is the United States. And that just, like, I still get like goosebumps thinking about that. And the last part was San Lo. It was mentioned in here. I went to San Lo when I was there, and I said, I went to the local historical society, and I said, where is the old part of town? And they said, there is no old part of town. Yeah. Over 90% of this town was destroyed in the breakout, so there is no old part of town to see. So that stood out to me. Thank you.
It's very dramatic. If you want to see anything left of old France, I mean, Bayeux was not really bombed. And so it looks, well, that's where William the Conqueror, and the tapestries there, of course, too. But yes, the devastation, you can even see from the documentary films.
I think I've got the next question. Hugh, I'm going to actually ask you a question. As you are exposed to not only what we saw in the film, but obviously some great inspirational leadership through, I think, a course you're taking. what translates to you? Because all of this we're doing, all this we're talking about is going to be eventually in your generation's hands. So tell us what you see in that and what resonates beyond the response to Cronkite about Montgomery, but beyond that, when you listen to that, you go, okay, we need to start thinking about this, and what do me and my peers need to talk about more?
Well, I think that one of the things that we kind of, as a generational thing with us, is that I feel like in many ways we've got 1,000 different D-Days that we have to handle, and that's, might be a little bit of a poor comparison, but, as a generation, we've got a lot of things that, are questions that we have to deal with, that we need to find some sort of way to resolve, or, how are we going to live with these things? So in a way of like, we need to kind of have these kind of, pragmatic type of leadership that we saw through Eisenhower and through the generals in World War II. It's just that there needs to be a little bit more cohesion and a little bit more pragmatism, at least in my eyes, as to how we that's a takeaway that we could take from it all.
Susan, can I put a word in for Utah Beach, which gets...
Please, please.
I mean, it wasn't nearly as dramatic or important or deadly as Omaha Beach, but we really found, first of all, one of the first persons who landed on Utah Beach was Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., I guess it was, and he had said he wanted to die on Utah Beach, and he did not succeed in dying on Utah Beach, but he did die 5 weeks later of a heart attack. But the other story, another one of those villages that the great Stefan took us to, or places, there was a young Frenchman who, it's war, and he was severely wounded by the Americans. I mean, almost died, spent 8 months in a British hospital. I know you know who I'm talking about, and came back and later became mayor of this town, and he was the one that started the Utah Beach Museum. I mean, that is just, it kind of goes to what, you were talking about earlier. I mean, here is this guy who was almost killed by Americans, and he really did, and the Utah Beach Museum is interesting.
It is. It's a great museum.
Yeah.
It's also suffering from climate change too. They're afraid that with rising sea levels that they're going to have to move the museum.
Oh.
Yeah, this is a thing. If you haven't been, I would highly recommend you get there in the next couple of years, because things just get reshaped. That's a remarkable story, and there's so many of them like that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing for Americans who feel concerned about our overseas image, and many of us have been feeling for a long time that we have an obligation to continue to be the kind of America that others admire, but they still love us tremendously in that part of the world. Yeah.
And,
I see Lonnie Buck nodding her head. She's been there just a million times, haven't you?
It's not only there, just a quick aside, about 10 years ago, my wife and I went to Vietnam on a vacation. They adore Americans in Vietnam. I mean, it is unbelievable. And I mean, they really do. And someone said, well, it's kind of easy, they won. But it was, we at one point, we didn't mean to, but a friend had set up an appointment with their foreign minister. And he spent the whole time talking about the need for America to counter the Chinese there. And when you realize only, it's a different part of the world, but I think it's similar to what we're talking about. 30 years earlier, we were in this vicious war. And I don't like the term American exceptionalism, because it's like, I think if I were a Brit, I would think about British exceptionalism. But I think there is something special about Americans that leaves a mark. And I think in the little bit we saw in France, I'm sure they would say very nice things about the Brits, but they talk about the Americans.
Yeah. They do.
I've got a question over here. So I'm surrounded by the other students that are part of the SALT program this coming year. And this has been a wonderful experience. I'm sure I'm speaking for all of us when I say this has been a wonderful experience.
Raise your hands, guys.
Yeah.
Come on, this is my group. Absolutely.
Yay!
So this question is specifically directed at Hugh, since you just went through this experience. But Al, if you want to chime in too and you have opinions, please do. As students just starting out on this year-long journey of studying this conflict and this battle in particular, and the strategy and the leadership, and culminating in the experience of actually traveling to Normandy, what is your advice? What should we be thinking about? What should we keep in mind as we start out on this journey?
I think like that the most important thing that you can do is just like when you have the program meets once a month on a Friday and a Friday evening and a Saturday morning. So I think that the most important thing that you can do is definitely take it in when you're there. I know I said that with Normandy as well, but you get once a month when you're in the room with Susan, when you're in the room with the people in your group. So you really want to just make sure that you're present and focused. As far as the program itself, I mean, we all kind of have like every year there's a little bit of a different goal. So, but just making sure that you're all kind of goal oriented the whole time through, and keeping those good communications. Have fun too. Yeah, become friends. Yeah.
I would just add, I'm sure Susan will prepare you for this. It was a wonderful achievement. It was not a foregone conclusion. And there was a great debate. He noted that Churchill had actually opposed Overlord for a while until the very end, May 15th, I think he said. And there were great debates about when to do it, where to do it. They went to Africa first, but just, as I say, Susan will get you there, but really verse yourself and how we came to that point of June 6th. 1944, and also remember, if how many have read that memo that Eisenhower dictated on the night of June 5th? He misdated it July 5th, but anybody who hasn't, go tonight and Google it, okay? I mean, it really almost brings tears to your eyes, and it's kind of hard to imagine some of our current leaders saying the fault was mine alone, but it really is inspiring.
I'll just add a little footnote to that. It was, and I got a big kick out of the fact he couldn't remember who found the note. I'll tell you who found the note, because it was Harry Butcher, his naval aide, who was responsible for keeping the staff diary. And so he came across this piece of paper. And he took it into the Supreme Commander, and he said, "What's this?" And I told him what it was, and he says, "I want to keep it for the diary." And Ike wasn't comfortable with that. I mean, this was for me. I was going to release this in case of failure, but it's a personal thing. And I carried one for every invasion. Isn't that interesting? And Harry Butcher got really very pushy about it. And that's how it ended up in the Eisenhower Library, that note. But you see, Harry Butcher said, please date the note. And it was July 6th when the note was presented to him, and Ike was so distracted or was so uncomfortable about being confronted with
I didn't know
this.
that, so he didn't misstate it on...
Yeah, that's when Harry Butcher put the pressure on. And he just wasn't focused on, so that's, I have that in my book because I just think it's so interesting. He tried so hard, I don't know if you noticed in this, not only to give other people credit, but I think, it was a painful revisit. He took the death of those boys very seriously, because another little footnote here is his own son, who died at the age of 3, would have been about that age. Mm-hmm. Exactly. He could have well been, on those boats.
That's right. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you.
Do you all promise?
Susan, Hugh.
Do you promise you'll Google that note tonight? Okay?